Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of KustoCon, the KQL conference where you will learn, share, and practice the beautiful KQL language. We're very grateful for having you online with us today, and we have an amazing agenda ahead of us in the next couple of hours. But of course, first of all, we would like to thank our sponsors. Without those, this wouldn't be possible. And then let's move over to the agenda. So as you can see, we have an amazing lineup of people who will have very interesting sessions today. And yeah, although this is an online event, we have a little surprise because in fact, those who are speaking and talking to you later today, we actually are all together here in one location. Yeah. So thank you for being with us, and we really hope you enjoy the next couple of hours full of KQL content.
Thank you.
Great. So we do have a little break around 17 p.m. European time. So make sure you grab something to eat by then, because after that we'll continue with 3 other amazing sessions. Good.
So, first presenters. I'm Gianni Castaldi. I am a security consultant as an independent contractor. I help customers doing basically everything E5, helping them, configure it for them, supporting them, just making sure that security is up and running. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I like to blog about Kusto and also have our KQL cafe every month with Alex.
Yeah, so my name is Alex Verboon. I do basically similar things as Johnny does, just in another country and in another company. Yeah, I'm also Microsoft MVP, and every month we run the KQL Cafe show. And yeah, then we have another person with us, and that's actually Frans Oudendorp. He's the man behind the scenes. He is making sure we actually get this whole conference streamed over the internet. So a big thank you to Frans. And if you don't know Frans, Frans is also running a very cool podcast regularly, Talking Security, it's called, where he also has regular guests where they talk about security topics. Good. So the first session, and for that actually Johnny and I are going to take a seat. For those who have never heard about KQL, we want to start light today, the conference, especially for the people we were able to inspire, to learn a little bit more. And throughout the other sessions today, you will see various techniques and fields of practice where you can apply KQL. But let's first start with the basics.
So, like on the slide, Kusto query language, KQL. It's a query language inspired by the name Jacques Kusto, of course. We also had in our KQL cafe our good friend Henning talking more. We had Alexander talking about KQL. But it's basically a nice query language in a lot of Microsoft products where you can query data. It's KQL, Kusto query language. So, and this is a slide we often use. It's the history of IT basically. Back in the days we started with Windows batch scripting, with VBS, with Quick Basic, making small tunes. And as we grew bigger, we started with VB script to make some maintenance things, making sure that if a device logs on, that we can make cool notifications, that we could configure things. But that wasn't really that awesome. So in 2006, we started with PowerShell. And PowerShell was really good because you could do things remotely. You didn't need any tools. And in the end, the tools were start using the products, well, the PowerShell. And later, back in 2018, 2019, Kusto became public available for us in the security products. It was in Azure Monitor. And it's a good way to advance your career because you can use it in IT, you can use it in management, you can use it in data analytics. There are all these places where you can use it. So it's an advancement of IT scripting languages.
Yeah, so I always used to refer this should be part of your IT toolbox. So we will look into some of the professions later. But like Gianni said, a couple of years ago when this became popular, I used to say this is the next PowerShell, right? This is something, no matter what you do in IT, but nowadays, especially when you work with Microsoft technologies from security to cloud infrastructure, learning KQL will be very essential. Even when you now look at job descriptions, you will more and more find, that KQL is something employers would like to see that you master, right? So if we take a quick look, just at the Microsoft Learning Path, that you can find on learn.microsoft.com. You have those various learning paths, career paths, and when you go in there, you will basically find out that there's always a chapter, discussing KQL in one or the other way. Be it, if you are a cloud administrator, a security engineer or consultant, a detection engineer, an IT infrastructure operator, and so on, you will always come across KQL because KQL can, help you to find information, be it, again, you want to find a possible vulnerability, you want to find maybe an adversary in your system, you want to find out about performance issues that you might have on your systems, etc., etc. So, I always make that bridge to PowerShell. Back in the days, we would also use PowerShell to maybe collect data from our on-premises infrastructure. And nowadays, we can basically also leverage KQL for that. So as you can see here, to summarize, we first looked at the career paths. We then looked a little bit at all the jobs, and these are just some example where you can make use of KQL. So Gianni's going to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Cool. There's this note too quiet. Is that for here, or did you add it?
Sorry?
There's in the lower left, right-hand corner, they're saying too quiet. Not sure if that's anything.
Are we too quiet?
Yeah. Okay, good. So basically, the products where we can use KQL, like I said, it started, at least for me, in the Azure Monitor side, in the Azure Log Analytics, and then it grew later on to Sentinel, to Defender. But there are also other tools, like nowadays you have a pretty big feature set also in the Azure Data Explorer, the Microsoft Intune, in the Configuration Manager, and Application Insights. Even in Azure Fabric nowadays, you can all use this good query language to handle your data in a structured way in all the different products. So that's basically where we use KQL.
Good. Then, if you now think of, okay, now how can I try this? Well, the good news is, there are a couple of ways how you can start practicing KQL. There are public so-called playgrounds. So you will see them listed here. And if you actually go to those, let's call it public playgrounds, you will have access without having to pay anything. You don't have to register. All you basically need is an Entra ID account, even if that's the one from your company. And you'll basically get access to a pre-populated log analytics workspace, or for Azure Data Explorer, you can basically start uploading, some of your own data, or just some demo data. Imagine you can download maybe a CSV file with all the country codes, or some stock market numbers. So you have a data set, and you then can start practicing, with your first steps of KQL, and we're going to show you some of them later on. Now, if you happen to be lucky and you have access to a Microsoft Defender environment or Microsoft Sentinel, then of course even better, because there you're going to find data, from your own company. And even there, what's also important, I recently encouraged someone to start using KQL, and he said, yeah, but I don't want to break anything. Now the good news is, and we'll elaborate a little bit on that later, KQL in general or by default is read-only, right? So it's unlike SQL, where you could update records, delete records. If we're speaking about log analytics, you're not going to break anything, right? There's nothing how you can impact, your environment, basically. Okay, you might write wrong queries that take a long time to process, but just to take out a little bit that fear, it's read-only, so there's nothing you can break here. So definitely, if you don't have access to an environment yet, and before you maybe deploy your own log analytics workspace, try out these resources if you haven't already. Another topic, as part of learning KQL that we would like to share with you is, of course, the community. And I apologize upfront for all those that are not listed here, because probably there's way more people, but those are the ones that came to my mind, and I'm now and then in contact. So in terms of learning from others, what others do, definitely check out these people through LinkedIn, X, or their GitHub repositories, because who likes to reinvent the wheel, right? Nobody does. And I also, even nowadays, when I see a new function, and to be honest, not always it's that easy, to understand how those functions work, because maybe in the documentation they're a little bit explained in a too abstract way, something that doesn't really relate to me. But if I then go out and I try to search whether any of my, let's call it virtual KQL colleagues has already used that function, I now and then have that aha moment. So definitely check out those resources on your journey of learning or improving KQL. Another topic I would like to mention is KQL search. KQL search was introduced, I believe, almost 1.5 years ago by another community contributor called Ugur Kok. And he did an amazing job by, I would always say, it's like a water cooler of everything KQL that we have on this planet, because he's basically aggregating all the GitHub repositories that people are willing to share into his platform. The cool thing is you don't have to, like I always used to do, go across all those GitHub repositories to find out whether there's anything new, but now you can basically just go to KQL search, and you will basically always see the latest contributions from community members that attach their repo, but also individuals who are willing to share their individual KQL snippets. So maybe here also a big shout out, to you. If you would like to share something, even if it's, a simple KQL script, if you want to contribute to the community, consider submitting your query to kqlsearch.com. Definitely a very cool thing. You can do advanced searches. You can also filter. So if you want to know, for example, what Bert Young has posted recently, you can filter on his name. If you're in front of a specific table in log analytics, you can select a table name and see what other people have actually created in terms of KQL queries or detection rules around that topic. So yeah, also a great platform to start learning KQL.
Definitely. So, and other resources, there are, of course, many. You have the Kusto Insights monthly newsletter. Is it monthly? Yes. And basically there you get every month, you get the latest and greatest in your mailbox. Then of course, don't forget KQL Cafe, where Alex and I and our guests, we do a monthly KQL session where we discuss what we did, what's new, and also the take on KQL of our guests. Also, small advert, if you want to join us, if you want to share your knowledge about KQL, contact Alex or me, and then we can set you up. I think we're booking for March next year and on. So if you want to have time, if you want to present something, share your knowledge, you can join us. You don't have to be a presenter expert because you can just share it, you can sing it, you can demo, you can do slides, do whatever you want, as long as you share your take and help the community learn more. Then we have, of course, we have the blog, Kusto King. There's the aka.ms/mustlearn KQL, which is often used as the basics because Rottrand did a really good job in capturing a good flow of basic operators which you should learn. And then we have the book resource, three nice guys, Matt, Mark and Rod. They created the book and the definitive guide to KQL. And we're also, thanks to Microsoft Press, we are able to give away 5 of these books actually. And we'll do that later during the sessions. Those are basically, good things to learn KQL besides the playground that Alex mentioned before.
Yeah, let me also put an emphasis again on, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? I mean, also simple things can be beautiful. And again, I made this paradigm to PowerShell, right? I mean, okay, you have different ways of using PowerShell. You can write a one-liner, you can do 2 lines, then you start writing functions, then you start writing even longer scripts over time. And I see the same in KQL, right? I mean, sometimes you can just achieve something very smart by just a one-liner, right? Because it's what you're actually retrieving. Maybe you found out that somewhere in a log, you can search for something specific. That doesn't per se need, 20 lines of KQL code. So I really like to encourage people, either be a guest on our KQL Cafe show or share with the community. Don't be shy. Any contribution is always very much appreciated.
But I think that's also a good one that, like Alex said, beauty is in the simplicity, but also it's a good learning experience if you run into the limits, because there's a limit often of 10,000 characters in your code, or the detections can run 2 minutes, or your query can run 10 minutes. If you run into these breaking points, then you start learning, because then you truly have to optimize, you have to change, you have to make sure that it's getting running again. So those are all cool learning experience.
Yeah. Good. So now we had all this introduction thing. Gianni.
Yes.
I mean, what's this whole KQL about? I mean, please give me some examples so I get to the next step. I mean, now we talked about, okay, where to go. There's books, there's people, there's communities. I want to do some hands-on.
Yes. So like I said before, Kusto, it's a read-only language. So you can request data, but you don't edit it. And that's the way it's fast. It's plain text and it's easy to work with. It's quite good defined. There's a lot of operators. There's also new operators. And it's easy to learn work with data. So basically, as you saw in this graph here, we have a chunk of data which we need to play around with. So we want to filter it, prepare it, and that we can do with the where operator. It's simple, just saying, hey, we are looking for a certain value in a column and we want to return that. Next, we can analyze it. There are several operators, but in this example, we use the summarize operator to summarize a count for each account. So that way that we can know what happened with a certain case or with a certain sign-ins. And then we can prepare the data for visibility. And in this example, we do it with a limit 10. So we only return 10 rows instead of hundreds, because that's not easy to handle. So that's basically how you can play around with data in several layers.
Okay, so let's give me a little bit more insight. So I have a table, I get that. Did I switch too fast? No, I didn't. Yeah. Okay, so imagine I have data of signing logs or Intune log data and whatsoever. Please give me some more context all this?
Okay, so basically Kusto always runs in a cluster. Cluster is the main entity, and below the cluster you have one or more databases. And basically in the database you can have tables, of course, like in every database, but then it gets, it's most likely like SQL because each column in the database has its own data type. And that's the same goes with the Kusto query language. You have, data types, so it's good to be aware of sometimes what are the data types, how can we do that. And of course we have rows, and the rows are just basically all your records. Next bit are functions. Functions can be stored or can be runtime, and you can use the functions. For instance, a function is a async parser where you convert data, you parse data, but you can also run it at runtime. You use the let operator to create a function to handle data and to make sure that the data is in the form you'd like. And there's also another option called views, and views basically are virtual tables, so to say. So you can make sure that if you want to play around with data, temporarily store it and then join it against something else, you can use views. And lastly, we have the external data, because sometimes you don't have data in your table, sometimes you have a log file on a SharePoint or somewhere else, or in Azure Storage. Then you can use external data to grab the file, even use SaaS tokens to authenticate against Azure Storage, which is quite cool to have like a secure way instead of just plain text file on GitHub. And that's basically the main entities we have in the Kusto query language.
Good. So now I'm in front of, some table. Give me some more meat about that bone.
Okay, good. So we have the help. The help in the top row, that's basically the cluster in this example. This is the example database of Microsoft. If you go to the KQL demos, you will find this. So help is the cluster, and then if you can scroll down, you see a lot of items below that. These are all the databases. So the first one is Contoso sales, and the last one, which we folded open, is the security logs.
So that is in Data Explorer, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Correctly.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
so if you're going to log analytics, you won't see a cluster level. You will basically see all those tables that are listed there.
And then your log analytics is basically the database running on a cluster. Even if you do like the 1 terabyte commitment every month, then you get your own cluster. I'm not sure if you're able to access it then, but that's a way to really have your own cluster where all your data lives in. Then next is in the database, of course, we have the tables, which has the Excel sign, so to say. In this case, authentication events. And below that, we can see all the values, all the columns in the tables. And as you can see in brackets, they're all strings. And that's also good to know, because if you want to compare things, they must be the same type.
Okay, so recap. If I work on an ADX, I have a cluster, I have databases in there. If I work with log analytics, of course, behind the scenes, there's also these clusters, but Microsoft is managing that for us, so we don't have to care about that. So I would say most people probably will end up in their day-to-day work, on the log analytics. If they work with Intune, with Entra ID, you always have these nice options called, where you can forward your logs. To export them continuously, and usually, you specify a log analytics workspace, and that's where you can end up working. Now, you mentioned something about attributes. So I guess like in any database, Oracle, SQL, those attributes can have different types, right?
Yes, exactly. So basically, this is the whole list. You can also find it on the Microsoft Learn. But the main things are, the Boolean is always represented with a 1 or a 0. But if it returns, then it's usually true or false. We have date time, of course, simple, decimal, int, long, real. Basically, all the numbers are the same, but they have a separate precision. So if you want really precise numbers, a bit of mathematics, but the precise your number is, the more complex calculations you can do. Then we have time span, strings, GUIDs. GUIDs weren't used a lot, but nowadays you can also find that tables have their own GUID column with the GUID type instead of the string type.
Okay, so lots of this looks familiar, but what especially catches my eye is this dynamic. Can you tell a little bit more about this dynamic type?
Yeah, so the dynamic, if you want to have multiple items in a value, then you can use a dynamic, which is basically a key and a value. And you can describe it just like JSON. So it's a combined table, so a combined field, so to say.
Yeah. Okay, and I guess I'd like to make a little point here. That is where things may become a little bit different as in SQL, although there probably you could do this as well, but you will see this a lot in log analytics, right? I mean, that's the beauty of log analytics. Although at the top level you will define some of the attributes, that always are there, like the time generated is an important one because that is when actually the data was ingested. And of course, you have those internal attributes. We're not going to go into those right now, but you will definitely learn later about them. But then, you have things like, okay, name, first name, last name, as an example, right? But you're not limited to that, right? If you, and we see this in various security tables, if you just want to store some, additional data, and that additional data doesn't always have to follow the same structure on every row, you can use this dynamic. So basically, I try to explain this as simple as possible. Basically, you can put in, a subcategory of attributes like, city, place, whatsoever, but on the next row, it could be totally different data that you then can parse as you process the data afterwards. And we're going to show some of that, I think, in a couple of slides, but again, pay attention to the dynamic data because usually that is, where I call it almost like nested data or additional information can be stored in. Yeah. Good. So now that we know about the data types, the databases, the tables, the logs, let's just get our hands dirty. And okay, I now logged on to this demo environment. If I've never used KQL before, how do I familiarize myself, for example, with the tables that are in there? Can you give me some tricks? Because I guess usually when you're in front of data, you want to start data mining. And I guess that is something that I would argue probably most of the people want to do, to understand what data is in here, whether there's any interesting data for me. If I'm a platform engineer, I'm probably interested in some performance type data. If I'm an Intune engineer, I want to know something about my Intune platform. And I guess before I can even think of, aggregating data, and filtering data, I first must become familiar with the data model, right?
Yes. So basically, when we start, of course, you pick a table, pick any table you like. In this case, if you go to the aka.ms/la demo for log analytics demo, then you will get this kind of view. So in this case, we take the performance log, and in the performance log, there is a ton of data, but like Alex said, let's first understand the data. So we type in a take 5, which basically says, take 5 records of the whole table. And actually what this does is also more or less random order. There are other ways to have it in a selective order, but if you do take 5, it's not the 5 first or the 5 latest. Bear in mind with that, because that can, it can shift a bit if you're expecting some data.
Yeah, it's actually a great way. I usually run this like, I run it, I look at the data, I run it again. Because then you get a feel at least, okay, is this always, like the same type of data? Or, as I tried to refer before, sometimes you will suddenly see that maybe a specific row, actually has more data, in it as maybe another record, right? Because there's no rule like you always must populate a certain value. Like, for example, we have in SQL, right? Where in SQL you can say, okay, it's not allowed, to store an empty value, right? here it's well possible to have that situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Give me another trick.
So the next trick would be to, if you have the data, you want to have the schema. So if you type in pipe get schema, then we can basically show all available columns, their order, and the data type, which is important because that way we can make sure that, for instance, if we have a dynamic, that we first maybe convert it to a string, or if we want to compare a number against another number, we need to make sure that they're both integers, for instance, or both strings, just something that you can compare to. And also, if you have a value, a numerical value, which is a string, and you want to use between, then it also can break because it's a string and not a numerical value.
Yeah, like, sorry for all my coughing. Yeah, like with date time strings, right? I mean, you know, KQL has a plethora of functions, so it's quite helpful to understand, okay, you know, how is the data represented, or, you know, in the table? Is it already a date time string, so I can just use my time functions to maybe display it differently, or whether I first actually have to get that string value into a date time format so I can actually work with it, you know, when I wanted to do range calculations, or just look at data in between or ago, and all those nice functions. Same, like you mentioned with dynamic, right? If I want to parse out data, right, I have to do things like, you know, parse JSON, right, or use MV expand, and all those, you know, advanced functions you'll probably come across as you go on your KQL journey. Yeah. Good. So, then I also, sorry, Gianni, I just added those last minute in because I want to give some love to our friends of the Log Analytics team. We had them on our KQL show, little spoiler, and they introduced KQL simple mode. So this is for those people, you know, that maybe now and then, you know, have to go to a KQL Log Analytics table, and they don't know KQL, but you know, let's give them a helping hand. And that's what's called KQL Simple Mode. So on the right corner of your Log Analytics workspace, you should see that button. Yeah, you can click it, and maybe it's almost like, you know, a click UI to get some aggregation of your data. So you can do simple things like, you know, time range. You can add filters to it. You can even select and deselect the columns that you actually want to show. You can even aggregate. I believe I added one on the next slide, right? So you can do simple things like, okay, give me a summary or a total of something. And you can also, once you have finished this, you can change to advanced mode, and you would actually see your KQL query as you would have written it yourself. So definitely helpful for those that say, well, you know, the KQL stuff I leave to other colleagues. Nevertheless, I want to be able to do something with KQL if needed, and or if you're just starting to learn KQL, of course, you know, learning paths are different for every individual, but this also might be a helpful thing to know. Good. So let's get back to our statements, right, and wrapping this up. So, you know, you presented this table. So in this case, we have the security table. Right?
Yes, exactly.
I'm interested in, you know, specific events, and this is also super important. Gianni briefly highlighted, right? There are limits in the rows we return, right? And that's not because there is technically a limit, but, you know, it simply doesn't make sense to get 1 million records back, right? Because usually you have to do something with data. And that's why you will always hear us preaching, you know, filter as quick as possible, right? I mean, you know, just looking at all your security events is not really going to be useful, right? Because you are looking for something, right? Yeah. If you look at your signing logs, you know, you probably, you know, want to know something, right? Where did conditional access fail? If you look at your Intune logs, you know, you're probably after, you know, are all my devices compliant, right? So at the very top of almost every statement should be a where clause to already do that first filtering of your data, whenever possible.
Yeah.
So let's break this down, Gianni.
So we had the query and we started with security events, which is of course the table. But if we do the security events in a large environment, you will run out your 30,000 records. So what we need to do is we will think about what would we like to see. And in this case, what we would like to see is we would like to see all successful sign-ins. And in the Windows event log, all successful sign-ins is the event 4624, which is basically successful sign-in. So next up is, so we do a security events where event ID equals 4624. When you do that in a large environment, you will still get a lot of records. So we want to maybe see how many times did a user sign in. So we're going to use the summarize operator, and with the summarize operator we can aggregate. And in this case our aggregation will be the count. So the count for the tabular operator, and then we do it by the column which is account. So basically we'll return all entries per account, and then you have the numbers of sign-ins per account in your selected time period. But that can also be too much if you have a really large environment, you have like 30,000 records and you have 100,000 users, that won't work. So then we use the limit. And if we look at the right column in this table, we can also see the specific names, because it's important to know how to call things, because if you call things like a column, you know, okay, it's a single horizontal row, a record is a single vertical row, and that way you can also talk to each other and mean the same things, which sometimes you get a bit of confusion if people are calling things different. So security events is the table, the where events is a tabular operator, because you're working with the table, you're making sure that in the shape you want. Event ID is a column, of course. A string operator is equals. Then we have the 4624, which is an integer. If you actually don't want to use quotes around an integer, that's good, because then the language doesn't want to convert it to a string. So you don't have to put double quotes in there. Then next is the summarize, because it's a tabular operator, because you're working with a table. Same goes with count, and then the tabular operator modifier is the by, because you're modifying something, because you're aggregating on a count, which is again the column. Next you have another tabular operator, which is the limit, and then the integer value is 10, because we want to show only 10 items.
Yeah. So, and maybe looping back to all the different job professions we talked about, depending on what you're actually working on, you're going to use these aggregations in a different way, right? I mean, Olaf will talk about it. I mean, if you do detection engineering, right, you can probably not return hundreds of rows, right? Because there will be maybe too many false positives or too many alerts generated, right? If you are doing threat hunting, maybe it's okay to have a set of data, because afterwards, a threat hunter is going to, use his brain and goes through the data and analyzes, right? If you are just working in systems management, maybe you just want to do some inventory stack counting, it's totally okay, right? So the point I want to make is that probably the whole aggregation, summarization, there's no wrong or right, it will always be applied to the use case you're working on, or, what you want to know out of the data, right?
Especially if I look back at my queries from years ago, from 2-3 years ago, it may be not that advanced as I'm doing now. So maybe I'm thinking, wow, why did I did it like this way? Or I'm thinking, wow, I was really inspired to do it like this way.
Yeah. Good. So liking in SQL, I mean, we can be very precise with things. Also be aware that in general, KQL is case insensitive unless you want it, right? So.
Yes.
Yeah. We always have to think about it. It's like with all those joins, by the way. We're not going to talk about joins today, but be very careful as you get into the join thing, the outer left, the outer right. that you get the right results there. But yeah, here are a few examples, like the explanation point equals is like not you can do case sensitive, etc. So another useful things to know. Definitely look at all the resources we shared with you. There's a couple of examples documented there, right? So we have a few minutes left. So let's do a little recap. So if you're in front of that log analytics workspace, right? First thing you can do, for example, is just to select a table. And then through the UI, you can select time range. I would strongly recommend, just in the interest of everybody, that we don't burn unnecessary, data center cycles. So if you play with data, in the demo database, 7 days is maybe enough to start. And I think the default in log analytics would probably be 24 hours or so.
I think 7 days even.
Or 7 days, yeah, okay. So you can configure that manually, right? And then, just start looking at the data a little bit, right? By expounding. So if you're in the log analytics UI, you can basically expound the record, right? And there you might actually find those dynamic tables that you can expound again, right? And sometimes you can expound them again, and you will see, the data that's actually stored within your tables, right? Then the next one, Gianni.
Yes, so we set the time range, and now the next thing, we're playing with the data, and a cool operator to use is the distinct operator, because sometimes you can have a lot of values. You can imagine if we OS type, we only have 2, or we can have Mac OS, but it's quite small. But if you then go to the versions, for instance, if you want to see how many systems have been upgraded to 24H2, and you do a distinct on that column, and then you can also quickly have a feeling of which kind of data do we have, and make sure that you're making the query as small and as fast as possible. So you can use your distinct for a where filter and then continue from there.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, let's filter first, but before you know what to filter on, right? So we take this table, right, heartbeats, and I'm only interested in the Windows platform. I see that there's an attribute, like OS version, OS platform whatsoever, but just curious, what values are in there across all records, right? And that's a cool thing. I don't have to worry whether there's 100 records, 100,000. If I do a distinct on an attribute, I get basically all possible values that might be in that table. There, by the way, it might make sense, if I know, okay, they typically store the data for 30 days or 90 days to, of course, set the filter to 90 days so that I have any possible value that was ingested in the last, time. So I know about those values, right? So let's bring this further.
Yes, so like I said, the where operator, if you know what you want to filter for, you use pipe where, then the column name, in this case we had Linux, we had Windows, so we choose to filter for Windows, pardon, then you get all the Windows devices in this specific environment.
And the next one?
Yes, so project, there's a lot of projects. Project basically is the main form. You have project key, project reorder, and you can do a bit of different things in there, but with the project you can basically select all the columns you want to return. So we have the Windows events, and then we only want to know that when was it generated, what was the IP, the name, maybe the version, or the IP, the remote IPs, and this way we can have a smaller table, because also if you want to handle a lot of data, you can't join it, you can't union it, so it's better to, like you said, filter first and play later.
Yeah, so really depending on what you want to know right now on your use case you're working on, I usually try to throw out all attributes because they're just disturbing. They also impact performance, right?
Yeah.
Unnecessary data. If later you want to build it into workbooks whatsoever, they're just annoying. So I used to, either project or project away stuff I want to use. So definitely as you start learning KQL, or even if you're advanced, looking those, other project functions, project keep. Gianni shared a very cool trick recently. If you have a table like we had in Defender somewhere, like all the attributes start with ASR, and I just want to, you don't have to spell out, project and then, all those 15, 20 ASR attributes because maybe Microsoft adds some additional ASR attributes, so then we're doomed with hard-coded. But you can do, for example, ASR star, right? And that sort of trickery. So definitely useful command as well. Now here we can do more, right?
Yeah, so besides filtering on the top, we can also use it to filter inline. So we do a where time generated, and then we can say greater than ago 7 days, because in this case we want to make sure that we only show the last 7 days of data. So that's this slide.
Yeah, and very often you will see people actually using a function. So starting with let command, where at the beginning of the query, you actually define this. A little bit like, best practice in PowerShell, right? Put variables at the top of your script. I try to emphasize the same for KQL. So, that, if people share their queries in the community, it's very helpful if those things, can be changed at the top. So you can, specify how far I want to go back, what interval I want to use, etc. So also take a look at those, like greater and smaller than ago, and there you basically can work with human understandable things like 7D for 7 days, or S for seconds and minutes and whatsoever. You can, you will see a lot of those functions that work with that. Yeah. Good. Another example.
So the summarize argmax, that's also, like I said, with summarize you can aggregate, and the argmax was for me really an eye-opener, because back in the days when I started, I always made a let statement, I did a query, then I did another let statement, then I did a join, because I wanted to join data together, usually because there was one value or some values that I wanted to have in my summarize. But then when I found out about the summarize argmax, you can basically specify the column which needs to be the main value, so to say, and then you return all other values by the computer. So in this case, you get the latest records by computer name, so you get only one record, which is a really nice way to play with data.
Yeah, so if I go over a table, because this is also important to understand, and we'll probably go beyond the hour we have here, but maybe also fundamental thing is, in log analytics, and I'm not going to talk about Data Explorer, but we're not updating records, right? So there's always a new record. And they also kind of fall off the table after my retention period, right? So if I am interested in looking at the latest status of a device and a specific information, that's also an important thing to know. I will do a summarize argmax, where, for example, a specific attribute, is not empty, like always built, and then I know, okay, this was the last record where the device submitted its inventory information with OS build, with a value actually in OS build. You can also do the opposite, by the way, if you want to know in a specific time frame when a device, first, brought a record, that would be the argmin. So definitely also, as you start to learn KQL and do some stack counting, and definitely a helpful function as well. Yeah, and then here, maybe also a cool example, sometimes there's no value, and of course that looks ugly. So, not expecting you, if you just start learning KQL, you get to these details, but just that you get a glimpse of, what you can do as you move forward. So if you don't like, those empty things, or if you want to create your own attributes based on a specific logic, we can extract information. We can use parse KV and all those advanced functions. We can do regular expressions whatsoever. But here, just a simple example where I say, okay, basically I'm going to manipulate the existing attribute that if the value is empty, right, I'm just going to give it, some value rather than just leave it empty, right? So that's here what you see in this very example here. Good, let's move on. We have only 10 minutes left. So another thing for those people that like to visualize things, maybe also good to know that we can also show things in various graphics using your render operator. We can do, not maybe as fancy as in Excel, but some common basics, like bar charts and what do we have? Bar charts, column
scatter
charts,
line charts, chart charts.
I think there's no donuts, right?
No, you have to go to Streamlit for that, for
I
instance.
believe the donut area is gone anyway, right?
Oh, it can be fun.
Yeah, good. But yeah, definitely in here, of course, if you're looking for more advanced graphics, I believe in workbooks, right? We have a little bit, some more options. So Azure workbooks, where of course you can also bring in data.
Yeah, or you go to notebooks.
But definitely a cool way, and also in, if you want to look at patterns, I believe the render option can be very useful to just show a lot of data and then see some trend, not just by numbers, but by visualizing things. So definitely also interesting. Yeah. Good. And yeah, with that, I guess we come almost to an end of our introduction session. What is KQL, where to start learning, using resources. I hope you enjoyed this. And now for all those that already knew all this, stay tuned for our next session that will start shortly.
Yes.
Thank you, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.